Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Hope you're having a good day. And well, thanks for joining today's webinar about AI-powered modernization for OpenEdge applications. I'm joined by my colleague, Peter Judge. Peter will be looking at the chat. When you have questions while I'm going through the presentation, please use the chat. Peter will be looking at that and either interrupt me, ask the question as we go, or we'll wait with the question till the end of the webinar and then we'll have a Q&A round. Okay, with that, let's get started. First, little intro to myself. I'm Mike Fechner. I founded Consulting Werk. I'm running the business, but my heart really lies within the technical side of the business. I'm supporting our customers as an architect in modernization projects. So typically looking at existing, aged, legacy, whatever you want to call it, code bases, could be as old as character TTY-based interfaces or GUI or old web applications. And trying to find a way to modernize these applications. I'm also responsible for our tool development. So I'm acting as product manager, architect, developer, among others, at the SmartComponent Library, our developer framework. And in this webinar, I want to share with you some of our experiences. We recently made AI-based code generation and refactoring is an important part of our current R&D efforts. We at Consulting Werk, we focus on modernization of OpenEdge applications. We provide to modernization projects our deep technical expertise, team of 18 experts. Somebody who has 20 years OpenEdge experience for us is still considered a junior programmer. So we have many people in the team that have way more than 20 years. We're present almost all around the world with customers all over Europe, with customers in the United States and Canada, with customers in Africa and Australia. We're present in North America and various European countries. Our main office is in Cologne in Germany. And what we provide are consulting tools and developer tools like the SmartComponent Library. Before I dive into the topic, still know or get to know people that aren't really aware that OpenEdge 11.7 is more than a ticking time bomb. Progress has retired OpenEdge 11.7 170 days ago. That was on April 1st. And what that just means is, any day you may run into an issue and your 11.7 based application may no longer be running, or you might have security threats. Progress has released, I think 2 weeks ago, most recent security alerts. And the mitigations to these security issues are only happening in 12.2 and 12.8, the current long-term supported releases. Nobody's going to support you in 11.7 anymore. Windows 10 will retire in a month from now, and there's still rumors, only rumors, and that around that time there might be a Windows 12. What could happen is that tomorrow or in 5 weeks from now, your first customer calls you, says, "Hey, I have issues running your application on Windows 12." If it's 11.7 based, you can be assured that Progress Software will not do anything to ensure compatibility between OpenEdge 11.7 and Windows 12. So these things can happen. These things will happen sooner or later. So really, you should be on a very quick plan to upgrade from 11.7 or before to OpenEdge 12.2 or 12.8. With 12.8, you're safe for the next 5 to 6 years. Good. So few words about the Smart Component Library. With the Smart Component Library, we deliver a developer framework designed to accelerate the modernization of OpenEdge applications. It's a full stack framework. That generally means that we have everything you need for a backend and various front ends. We provide a desktop-based framework, a front end based on GUI for .NET. We provide a browser-based framework based on a set of components for Angular, and a mobile front end based on NativeScript. We put a lot of effort on the back end because I personally believe that in 10 years from now, we will still be looking at an OpenEdge backend similar to the one that we have today. We will still be looking at service-oriented architecture similar to the one that we're building today. So I'm pretty confident to be able to see what's happening there, what will be happening there. I would never make a prediction about what are the front ends in 10 years from now. So future-proof backend for me is the key to be future-proof with your whole application. Front ends come and go. Within the backend logic, we support relational structures. I mean, that's where all OpenEdge developers come from. Direct access to database tables, temp tables, the for each on those, and so on and so on. But also object relational structures. When writing modern code, you cannot ignore patterns which make a lot of sense in other applications because typically they make a lot of sense to OpenEdge too. Within the framework, we provide a lot of components for application architecture, but also an application framework. The application framework is the bit in the product that provides more features that are relevant to users, like authentication, localization, menus, workflows, a batch scheduler, etc., etc. It's a separate component, but plays very tightly with the other components. One bit that we're very proud on in the framework are our RESTful features. We are convinced that with the Smart Component, we provide the simplest and yet the most flexible way to build RESTful interfaces for OpenEdge and to consume them. Of course, with Swagger integration, OpenAPI. Mentioned different user interface options already. And as we are typically using the framework in modernization projects, the integration with the existing OpenEdge application or legacy frameworks is very important for us. We deliver the full source code to our customers. We are constantly adding new functionality to it. We're usually providing between 1 and 3 releases a month. Depends a little bit on how big the features are that we're currently working on. But we're always adding something new. Customization, extensibility is very important. I believe that there are never two customers with exactly the same needs. DevOps is getting more and more important, so we provide templates for build, test, and deployment routines and environments, etc. We are still supporting the framework in 11.7 because we have some customers which are late with migrating away from it, but I hope to be able to phase that out anytime soon. Certainly no later than the PAC Challenge conferences this fall, because then we're going to have plenty time to kick out the 11.7 bits out of our environments too. And we provide support and maintenance services for the framework so that customers can be ensured that they're always going to be able to work with it. So on the application backend, well, it's designed around the Progress Application Server for OpenEdge, PASOE. We support a wide range of deployment scenarios. So basically, anywhere you can run PASOE, you can run a Smart Component Library-based backend. That could be on your own physical servers. That could be in a data center where you still know where it is. It could be virtualized. It could be anywhere in the cloud, Docker, Kubernetes. As I said before, anywhere you can run PASOE, you can run our backend. We support multi-tenancy, run multiple instances. If you're not able to use or not want to use multi-tenancy, you can also run multiple instances in the same database with a company key, etc. And all that with all the different front ends. So on the API development, REST and RESTful has become very important for us in the last couple of years. I don't know exactly when we started with that. We still support SOAP interfaces as well, of course, but as a matter of fact, nobody's really voluntarily using SOAP when you can use REST or RESTful. We provide a very easy way to implement RESTful services. Later, I'll show you that even AI can do that for us. With that, we can expose new functionality as RESTful services or provide existing legacy functionality as RESTful services. We provide them the OpenAPI Swagger documentation out of the box. The deployment of services is very easy. There's actually no deployment. The code declares APIs. We just need to add annotations to them. And we also support an API-first design where we start with an open API or Swagger specification for the interfaces and generate the code that implements that interface from there. Good. Let's look into AI and what that means for us and probably other OpenEdge developers. So we started using AI coding assistants for OpenEdge around about a year and a half ago, around Easter last year, to first accelerate our development, and now we're using it also to refactor applications supported or powered by artificial intelligence. And definitely last year, I was also in this field. Gen AI and OpenEdge, does it even work? You had people talking to each other. Well, I tried to ask ChatGPT to write me for each customer, and what it generated didn't even compile. Then people started saying, yeah, well, there isn't even enough open source AVL code available to train those large language models. Well, that's probably true. There isn't a lot good OpenEdge code publicly available to train LLMs. People said AVL applications are way too complex for an AI to understand. Well, I could talk long about this slide. ChatGPT has one big disadvantage. ChatGPT really only knows what's publicly available. The AI coding assistants that you'd be using on your desktop or in cloud-based environments for you, they have access to your application code. So they have a lot more to learn from than code that's publicly available. So they know how to build for eaches because there'll be probably millions of for eaches in your application already. The complexity, that is just not a problem. Especially ABL is a very verbose language. If you can read natural English, you can read most ABL applications. Certainly, if you sprinkle a few comments here and there, and if your variable names and your procedure names are more or less meaningful. AI can read emails, AI can read longer texts, so why shouldn't it be able to read source code? So that's really not a big problem. So Gen AI is the particular species of AIs that generate documents, that generate typically text, maybe images, audio files or videos, but for us as software developers, we're looking at source code, which is also text. So Gen AI can support us during writing source code. And it starts with providing more intelligent proposals while writing the code, or a chat interface where you can instruct it to write a method that solves XYZ. Write me a unit test for that. That method is called prompting, and prompting then becomes the new form of wizards for developers. That can also be used to refactor code. AI is great at explaining what code does. Refactoring code is a combination of understanding what the existing code does and knowing how to write new code. These tools, they understand the context. They can distinguish between different programming languages, and AI coding assistant knows when it's generating ABL code or C# code or JavaScript code. It understands the framework. It understands terminology in the application, database schema, architectural terms, stuff like that. So, and for application modernization, well, that's a big part of what we are working on right now. Starts with the interpretation of existing code and transition into new architecture. And while doing that, we separate UI and backend code, refactoring source code, do things like deduplication, splitting up of spaghetti code.ps into multiple class files, etc., etc. We are currently using a combination of Windsurf with Cascade, which is the chat interface there, or Devon, and traditional methods that we've been using for a long time, using ProPass and Xref. The reason for that is there's actually two or three, couple. I'll go into that a little bit in the end. AI-based routines are typically not deterministic. A deterministic system is where you put in the same input data and you can rely on the fact that the same output data is generated. AI is not like that. For cost-based optimization, for timing reasons, sometimes also caching, whatever. When you ask ChatGPT 3 times the same question, it will always spit out a different answer. They may all be right answers, but it's going to be a different one. And when generating complex systems, we may want to have some more deterministic approach, and therefore we're combining AI with classic approaches. We're doing that using a technique or a standard called the MCP protocol, Model Context Protocol. It's a very new standard. It's just been released in April this year, but widely adopted by all the AI tools already, and a great way of plugging in tools into AI processes. The tool that I'm going to spend most of time in my demos to show that is Windsurf. Used to be known as Codium last year, rebranded into Windsurf around the end of the year. An AI assistant for software developers, which we're using since March last year. It doesn't know any ABL out of the box. It knows 70 other programming languages. You can integrate it into VS Code and Eclipse. Needs to be a very recent version of Eclipse. So developers use 12.8, it works. In 12.2, it does not, because the Eclipse version is too old. Windsurf, since the beginning of this year, provides its own IDE, a tailored version of VS Code. The Windsurf AI extension is built into the Windsurf IDE, of course, and they say they needed to do this step to get access to more resources and provide better programmer support than what Microsoft allows them out of the box. Windsurf IDE is not the only coding tool like that. So VS Code with Copilot or Cursor or whatever, there's probably going to be a new tool like that every week on the market. Do that too. As long as they're based on VS Code, the OpenEdge language server for VS Code from Riverside works perfectly fine in the Windsurf IDE, and that's a combination that we use day to day in our coding tasks. After a few days, it knew enough about our code base in OpenEdge that we already had very positively surprising results with code completion. As I said, ABL is easy to read. The identifiers that you have in your own control, variable names, procedure names, method names, class names, the more descriptive they are, the more verbose they are, the better. When we work with that, we have 6,000 classes of our framework always at hand, plus whatever the legacy application is. And that already gives a pretty good representation of, especially with the framework code, what I consider the reference code base that describes how we should be basing applications. So, and it started after really just a couple of days. It realized that when I start a variable name with the letter I, it's probably going to be an S integer, no undo. Without any out-of-the-box understanding of or training of ABL language. DE became a decimal as undo, and so on. Here's also an interesting example. That's a method that has comments for the parameters. So the PC additional fields there, it's described as being a comma delimited list of additional fields to add. So as soon as I start typing and define a variable I and a variable I count, it's offering me that, hey, you're probably processing a comma delimited list. You have an I count, so we need to do something with num entries and then do I equals 1 to I count loop. So it understands what I'm working on. That's the context that's currently in scope. And based on that, it's making very helpful proposals. Here's another example based on useful identifiers. If I create a method called process order with an input parameter pi order num, I just need to type define variable, and it offers me that my variable is probably going to be called order, and it's also type order dataset model because that's a type of classes in our framework that we usually use to access data. Then we need to new it. Then we use a filter pattern there to read a record. If the record is not there, then, well, we probably want to raise an error condition that the order is not found. Then I define a variable customer dataset model. Use that wants to find the customer of the order, and there that's been improved over time. It was still not yet sure about the key field that joins order and customer. It was prompting customer ID, but we all know that in the sports database it's custom, so this takes a little bit for these tools to learn that, or you provide a meta schema for that. That's a different topic. So when I fixed that, error handling for that, and done. That's now an example from a refactoring task that we did. We see there's a lot of code here dealing with writing messages to the log file, and instead of using directly the log manager from Progress, the refactoring that we wanted to do here was to use an API that we have in the framework that allows us to turn on and off these messages if we need them. And what this is about, it's about handling properties in a JSON file and setting properties in ABL classes based on that. And JSON only has one data type for numbers. So when assigning it to an ABL class, we need to know whether the number type is integer, in 64 or decimal. And as you can see in the bottom third of the code, I'm handling decimal values, but the message that I'm writing to the log file is pointing out integer. So a human developer a long time ago, I'm not going to say who that was, did a copy and paste mistake. And in the proposal to replace it with the API of the framework, that's a gray text there, Windsurf has automatically corrected the mistake in the message by saying, hey, this must be decimal instead of integer. So the proposal is not just copy and pasting the source code and the error and the message, the log message from before and replacing API with API. No, it's really contextually look into that, what it's doing, and that's the block that must be decimal because that's the only numeric type left. So fixing the error message there. That was pretty impressive. So the company Windsurf has been going a lot through the press recently. That a quite hot summer started in May. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, offered them to acquire the company for $3 billion. $3 billion for a company with 200 people, $3 billion. That's the state budget of small countries. Quite a lot of money for 200 people. And after 2 months of negotiations and silence, whatever, they refused. The following day, Google bought or licensed their intellectual property, so their AI coding agent can now also be used by Google. Google paid $2.4 billion for that, so they could keep the company and get almost the same amount of money from Google. But Google also got some of their top management members. And a couple days later, Cognition has acquired the company, and I still haven't found any source that says for which price. Cognition is also an AI startup, similar size, employee-wise, than Windsurf. Cognition's product is a browser-based platform for coding and refactoring tasks, which I'll show very briefly at the end of this webinar. So Windsurf and Cognition, Windsurf and Devon is a product from Cognition, are now owned by the same company. And we see that the two products are slowly already growing together, and that after, I think, 5-6 weeks after the acquisition. So it's quite interesting to follow this startup Wild West. And last week, Cognition has been valued $10.2 billion and got $400 million in additional funding. So there are really big amounts of money around there. Windsurf is now the brother of Devon. They're still very active in development. I mean, when products get acquired, I mean, you never know what that means to the future of the products. But here we're still seeing multiple releases per week. And a tendency that these tools grow together. And let's just use Windsurf now. So I'm going into the Windsurf IDE. Windsurf IDE is a tailored version of Visual Studio Code, as I said. They have their own color scheme. The layout is a little bit different, but mostly it works like Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to use some prompts that I wrote down in this text document here. I wanted to create an enum for workdays. I mean, this is natural language, even though this sentence doesn't make really a lot of sense, but it will understand it. Then it should create a parameter object, date range parameter with a date from and date to property, then create an interface for the workday calculator with a method that receives the parameter object instance and returns an integer as a number of workdays. Then it should create an implementation class workday calculator. Then I just thought, okay, well, let's make it a little bit more funny. December 25th and 26th is probably in large parts of the world not a work day. January 1st, not as well. And for us in Cologne, the Carnival Monday is usually not considered a work day. So let's see what Windsurf does with this instruction. So I'm taking this text and pasting it into the prompt window. And I'm going to wait a bit. Swimming, floating. Not sure if you can see that. Exploring. So what's now going on is the AI agent and the large language model behind, which is OpenAI's GPT-5 here. I can switch between different LLMs. I think they're better for certain tasks. Now it's looking for references that are relevant within my code base. Thinking about the algorithm to define the workdays. Creating an enum. Having his plan. Create the enum, create the parameter object, create the enum, create the interface, the implementation class. That looks like a valid ABL enum. I didn't have to define anywhere what the workdays are, or the days of the week are, because this common sense, common knowledge from the natural world, that is the data that the AI has been trained against. So I'm going to accept that. Now it's working on the date range parameter class. So it has defined the two properties with a date from and date to. It has defined a default constructor and a convenience constructor that takes the values straight like that. One thing which is funny, it's very hard to get it consistently to format stuff that we formed in blocks. It's very often off by one space. So the typical off by one issues also apply here. So I'm going to accept this. Well, and here we see the non-deterministic aspect. It has added the serializable keyword at the wrong location. So now it's working on the interface and then the implementation. And while it's exploring, diving, floating, whatever Windsurf says there, the first impression that we get here is, well, a question that you might ask yourself, wouldn't be we as human developers be faster in doing this ourselves? Maybe. But while this is running, I could do other stuff. So if you think about the most valuable thing that a human could be doing here is providing specifications and instructions and designing software, and not so much writing it then down in statements and functions, whatever. Then the speed of this isn't that relevant. And the larger the tasks get, the more the AI will be on the passing and be faster than the human developer. So now he's looking for the solution for the calculation of the workdays. So while we are waiting for that in the checklist, it has already, on its to-do, on its action plan, we already see that it has been able to find what Rosenmontag, Rose Monday in the next 2 years are, the 16th of February and the 8th of February. And now we're at the calculator class. So calculate work days based on the date range parameter. And we see it has created a method to determine whether a day is a public holiday or not. And like I said, every January 1st, every December 25th, December 26th is a public holiday. Rosenmontag is a public holiday because we're a business from Cologne. Now he's finalizing it, and probably he will also offer me now support in writing a unit test. So example usage, so that's a test program I could run now. And what would he like me to do? Add a unit test. So I could just say now, yes, please create a unit test, and it would do that. But I trust that this does the right thing. I tested that earlier, which wasn't exactly the same implementation because that's already quite a lot of code with quite a lot of variations, but very similar. So that was writing new code. So GenAI for refactoring, well, these coding assistants are great in understanding what existing code does. So, and refactoring is really the act of taking this understanding of what existing programs do and applying that to new coding guidelines, new coding rules. So let's do one sample. This sample, it's based on Sports 2000, but it resembles the coding style that we found at a customer where we've been trying this out. So the sample program, the original procedure here, was based on an internal procedure in a .p file that was doing a transaction, finding a record based on a global variable, and updates the fields on the screen. Obviously something that we do not want to run in a modern application. We don't want to have update statements anymore. And then there's some validation. This do while pattern here was there, and for me it was important to really resemble code that has been aged over the last 45 years, because that's how old OpenEdge applications can be. So What I did is I wrote a Jira ticket and gave the refactoring instructions in the Jira ticket, because I believe what's very important is that the humans stay in control of the application architecture. That means naming of objects that are generated, which methods go where do we, how do we deal with deduplication and stuff like that. So right now we're leaving the coding very often or more and more to the AI. But the design bits, that's then where we as human developers have more time to look at. So I wrote a Jira ticket, MISC 104, refactoring of demo AI, refactoring demo original procedure.p, create a new business task class named update customer address task in the demo AI refactoring package, create a parameter object called update customer address parameter with all the database fields updated in the update statement. Add an additional property in the parameter object for the global cust number used in the find statement, create a method, update customer address parameter, and so on and so on. Then in the bottom part, I said refactor the database access in the new method to usage of dataset model classes. Dataset models are our ORM wrapper. So that's basically relying on the fact that we have business entities that do all our database access to database classes, data access classes, and then an ORM wrapper on top of that to provide a very simple interface to use them. So that's where then the framework kicks in. Then for all message statements, the messages were hard-coded in text in English language, but in the modernized application, I want to have them in the message database table in the framework, because then they become translatable and I can reuse them and all that stuff. So create message in the smart framework with the demo message group and message number starting from 100 and replace message statements with code to throw a smart exception using the message group number of the created message. Okay. That is more or less the same that I would be writing as requirements to a human programmer. So I've recorded a video. I've recorded this as a video for two reasons. One reason is I could shorten the thinking time. And the other is in 1 out of 5 times, it doesn't work well. And that's mainly because we then need to, with the rule set that we have there in the background, we need to be more precise. It's a balancing act with the rule set. If you're too precise, you're providing too much context. It doesn't make it faster. If you're not explicit enough, then yeah, it gives the AI too much room for hallucination. What we see right now, it's doing certain MCP tool calls. And within these MCP tool calls, here with these two, it has taken the messages that it has found in the source code as instructed and called into the framework. Behind this MCP service is in the end a call into a PaaS-OE backend. So we call into the Progress application server to create a message. And the framework then confirms, yeah, this message has been created as demo 100 or demo 101. No, demo 100 is what we want, but the framework comes back, says no, 101 is already used, so I give you the next free number, which is 108. So it has then created, as instructed, the parameter object with all the properties or all the fields which are in the source code, plus the one to know which customer it is. And now we have this method update customer address, taking the parameter object, the assign statement is there where the using was, and then we have the validation. It has adopted the same validation rules, but this time around the dataset model classes and throwing those properties. We can look into that a little bit longer if we go through the real code. So here we see that is one of the messages there. The condition is name, address, city, need to be filled, and so on and so on. So very similar in the flow. The same rule has been adopted, but it follows new architectural patterns. So, yeah, the hard work, the actual interesting work of that is really to tell Windsurf how the new code should look like. And that's done through rules. Rules are documents. Here in Windsurf and many other of these coding assistants that are markdown objects, markdown documents that they provide a little bit of formatting, but markdown has a nice benefit that the formatting doesn't add a lot overhead. HTML usually adds a lot of overhead with formatting. The AI doesn't care about the formatting. It's more for us when we are editing that, and some headers, some bold text and stuff like that is very useful. And the rules are expressed in natural language, like when you do this, then follow this pattern. And when this happens, then do that, and something like that. Similar to what you would be explaining to a programmer. And then code samples. And these code samples are then being adopted to the current situation so that it knows that, oh, in some cases it needs to use a customer dataset model, in other cases it uses the order dataset model. But based on that, it is able then to translate a find statement into this. And the rule for this they include then, if you have a constructor that matches all the fields, then use that one. Otherwise, use the filter logic, etc. So plain English text. Could probably also use German text. The typical large language models, because they're so large, contain multiple natural languages. I don't know whether more exotic languages work, but I've tried German. That works quite nice. And yeah, a mix of sample code and natural language instructions. Then there are workflows. Workflows is more like reusable routines and MCP servers. So that was when it learned, or when it knew that in order to create a message, it needs to call into the MCP server to create a message record there and get the message number from there. MCP is quite interesting, and that also shows how quickly all this AI related standards evolve. The MCP standard was introduced April this year, so that's just 5 months ago. It's very often referred to as a USB-C standard for artificial intelligence, because almost all AI agents and coding agents, etc., support that you plug in MCP servers. An MCP server is basically like a REST service or local program that you register. And the key bit is that this service described in human language what it does. And based on this human language, natural language description, the AI agent and the large language model can decide when such an MCP tool should be called. So basically all the wiring between the AI agent flow and calling the tools happens automatically through the meaningful natural language description. Technically, MCP servers, they can be used with different protocols. For the MCP servers that run locally, like here in my environment, the AI agent starts a process and communicates through standard I/O with it, sends messages, receives messages. Could be HTTP or a real-time protocol with WebSockets. Real-time protocol is then when you see that while the tool is running, you already get some partial results back, and yeah, you get more this effect that the AI is entertaining you with intermediate results, and you don't have to wait for that. Most people implement MCP servers using one of these three SDKs. Fast MCP is a Python-based SDK. There's a Node.js SDK. Microsoft has a Model Context Protocol API where you can build MCP servers using .NET and C#. And those that know me will already have guessed which of the three I have chosen. Of course, it's the .NET one. So our MCP server is based on the .NET SDK for MCP servers, the OpenEdge proxy for .NET, so that the MCP server is a very small program basically on top of an Perso eCall, and the logic of our MCP servers is implemented in ADL. And we use them to improve the AI experience, and one of the aspects is we get around this non-deterministic nature of AI. We want to be having consistent results. Without the MCP server, the AI would, if you tell it to create a record in a database, it would create a .p file that creates a record and runs it. And if the configuration is right, it will probably do the right thing. If it finds database triggers and if you're logged in and all that stuff. But when I want to do the same stuff over and over again in the same way over and over again, I personally don't trust a non-deterministic system to always create a program to do the same stuff in a similar enough way. So that's one of the aspects there. But if we think a little bit bigger, if we generate applications and within the smart component library, business entities are very important and they're quite complex. They have a lot of moving parts. When they're always generated in a similar but slightly different way, well, at the end, a human should review the code. And if it's always different, the review gets way harder. And all maintenance tasks in the future, I mean, I want to build an application now for the next, I'm not going to say for the next 40 years, but at least for the next 10 years, there will be maintenance tasks. So it should be very, very consistent. And so for that reason, we use our classic code generation approaches in many areas. We use that to query and update framework database data and so on and so on. So we already had, since 17, 18 years, many code generators in the Smart Component Library. They're customizable, they're proven. Our customers have their own templates, our customers have their own extensions to the generators. So for us, it's very important to integrate that into this whole Gen AI and not start over. A business entity with all bells and whistles and the OM wrapper, that can be very easily 20 files, and they all follow a certain structure. Therefore, we use MCP servers to combine the best of both worlds. We can analyze legacy code using Gen AI, and then we use a deterministic ABL generator to build the skeleton and a lot of that, so that we don't play Russian roulette there. And then Gen AI kicks in again to implement custom rules within the business entity, for instance, or other bits of the picture. So we have implemented various MCP servers so far, and I'm pretty sure that this list will be growing a lot till the end of the year for code generation, obtaining cross-reference information. So for instance, if we find in legacy code a database table, which business entity should be used to represent that? Because sometimes an application for good reasons provides more than one business entity for the same database table. But for the standard access to that table, there should be really agreement about which one. And that agreement must come from humans. We can interact with the UI repository. We can query data from the UI repository. We can modify the UI repository. We can generate code there. Other metadata like messages, warnings, get cross-reference information about, I have a customer. How do I get all the orders of that customer? Stuff like that we have in the framework database that is very valuable for code generation. An MCP server is not a lot to show there. I'm not going to go in the code. Rather, I'm using the MCP inspector, which is a web tool by the company that has defined the MCP standard, Anthropic. That's a company that builds tools like Claude Code and the Claude AI agent, which is also great at writing code. And that's like a test suite similar to Swagger for REST services. This is a test suite for MCP servers. So I connect to the MCP server, and then I can start listing tools. For instance, I could say, well, what repository objects do we have there for customer? And I run this tool, and the tool was successful, and it shows me these objects in the repository. So this get repository objects and that description there, that is what the AI would decide on whether or not for a certain task that description is needed. So I can create a message here, for instance, and that was what's happening in the earlier sample. I want to have create a message somewhere in the demo group starting 100, and the text is, this is a test, and I run this tool, and that now makes a parse call, which creates data in the database, and this has now created demo 100. If I run that again, I've cleaned up the data from the earlier demo. That's why 100 was available. It created message 101. And this feedback, that's then what the AI agent, for instance, would be using to know what to refactor a message statement into. And with that, for instance, we can also start using that in code generation. I use this prompt, add a method, hello AI audience, to the logic object of the customer view in the repository. So in order to do this task, you need to know what the logic object is, which is a class. It means there's a file on disk. Diving again. So the task that it needs to do, it needs to find out what is a repository object master. It's again an MCP tool call, looking for the customer viewer. And then within the structural data that we return, there's a property for the logic class. Then it can read that file and add a message there. So this is basically bringing together the classic prompt-based code generation with a lookup in the framework database to find out what is the logic object of that thing. And when I just say hello AI audience, well, it knows, okay, I need to do a show message. On the non-deterministic nature of this, just before this webinar, I tried this again, and instead of our beautiful message from helper API, it was using the plain old message statement. So who knows what influenced that it does one or the other thing. So let's do a second refactoring demo. That's one that you may know from earlier webinars that we did. We have a update editing statement with some very old style validation logic. So it's validating the name field, messages here, validating the sales rep, and so on and so on. So these update editing statements in real-world applications are sometimes hundreds, if not thousands, lines of code long, and they are really one of the most relevant bits of legacy applications. So that was actually I got a little bit mixed up with the slides. So what I'm doing now is I'm using two prompts, and I've again recorded that as a video. Using the Smart Framework MCP server, that's what I say, just to be sure that it uses my generator and not tries to build the business entity manually. Create a business entity called customer demo business entity in the demo AI refactored customer package. for the customer table with additional fields for sales rep name, and country name. I could do a step earlier using AI and say, hey, look at that file and tell me which database tables it's using, etc. And in some cases we do that, but in other cases we need to keep in control of which business entities are created, because this here is actually one of the key bits of deduplication of logics, making sure that all similar logic goes in the same business entity. So then I could ask it to explain the validation rules. I'm going to skip that for timing reasons. And then I have another video or the same video that says refactor the validation logic in the update editing block in the update customer procedure and update editing sample into validate data method of the business entity, following the business entity validation rules, and refactor database access to the ORM wrapper. So that is the next video here. So I'm copy and pasting the prompts into Windsurf. I could have done that from a Jira ticket, same stuff. It really doesn't make a difference where it gets its instructions from. It just needs plain text, natural language instructions, and there it goes. So that's now the call to the MCP server. So create a business entity. We provide the name of the business entity, the database table, the additional fields. We can generate also more complex business entities. It's not needed in the sample. And on the right-hand side, we now see that how the business entity generator working on PaaSOE is doing its job and building the various bits and pieces of the business entity. The AI gets back a confirmation that it was successful and the actual class name that was generated, because that is then required for the next step. And then we say, well, now take the validation logic from the update editing statement, puts it in there. So it first locates the procedure, then looks at the validation logic, puts it into validated data. The validated data is still empty. That's the standard after the generation of the business entity. To be honest, I think in the video I've now just skipped a minute of what it's doing, all the syncing and checking and blah, blah, blah. So now it's asking the framework through an MCP call again, well, there's a sales rep table, which business entity and which table of the business entity should I use? And the country table, same thing. And there we are. So it has added a using statement already there in line 33. And when I scroll further down, we see the validate data method. Defines the two object variables for the dataset models, customer and country. Customer is also used for the sales rep. Sales rep is the second table here for the customer table, just to be a little bit more complicated. We have the validation logic, and it's also adopted the logics that uses the database values of the reference record to assign them to the representation that goes back to the UI to make sure that the country name is returned in exactly the same spelling. It adds comments to it, more comments than there have been in the originally. Very often, no, it didn't do that. Yeah, that's again. Sometimes it adds a big comment there explaining where it got the logic from during refactoring, but yeah, it's not always doing exactly the same. That's AI. So I need to do that again. So now to add RESTful annotations, we can take this prompt. It starts with the slash, and that references a workflow. So it means basically a shortcut to the instructions, slash add REST address annotation to business entity. And the slash customer AI demo, that's kind of like an argument to that. diving, navigating. Okay, now it's just starting to read the workflow instructions, so it looks like the AI is currently quite busy. I'll get back to that in a second. And that's a nice thing. If it just takes a while, we can do other things. So another refactoring that we often do is we take existing UI layouts, because very often the existing layouts of applications are the starting point for new applications. They typically get modified, different screen sizes, optimized for browser, display, or mobile device, or whatever. But usually the same fields and the same logical order, orientation. And there we also have quite a lot of functionality in our traditional tooling. And one of the things which is very helpful in real world is detection of lookups or zoom fields or whatever you call them. So you see after the country field down there, you have a button with the three dots to open a dialog, and then a description field, same for the sales rep. That's a UI pattern that we know quite well in our traditional tooling. And instead of rendering a fill-in and a button next to it, we do have a component in the framework that does it out of the box. So we're going to change the components on the screen here. And that's something which we can also do nicely that way. So in the instruction there's, well, I could ask it which frames are defined in that program. That is something which I would actually be trusting the AI to do. It's actually asking me a question to finish that. Well, it did add the right thing. Well, it took shockingly long. Okay. So it added the two annotations here, and that's really what we need to expose this business entity as a RESTful service, because that already took long enough. I'm not going to demo accessing this RESTful service in Swagger. But if I would do that, we would be seeing in Swagger that we can try to update the fields, and we would be seeing that the validation rules, which have been refactored from the update editing statement, are actually now in place for a REST service. So I'm going to accept that. So let's move on then to the next one. So I'm asking which frames are defined in that program, see customer2.w. For finding out which frames there are, it could do that in the AI way, or it could use our MCP server. I'm not really worried. That's something that the AI does well enough. It just needs to look for defined frame or form statements. Actually, if I use the same prompt, sometimes it uses the MCP server, sometimes it does it by itself. This looks like it's doing it by itself. So in the next prompt, This then converts the default frame in that program into a viewer in the repository named customer AI migrated viewer in the demo product module with the customer data source. So this returned, there's a default frame, and I can use it then as the next prompt, convert the default frame in that program. Yes. So there we see it's doing the MCP tool call, and then our traditional conversion routine for that task kicks in, running on PassOE. And I can then go into our UI designer and verify So here's that object, and I can see that in the design preview, with the screen there, we have country and sales rep being represented by a lookup component. So the button is part of that component. So the AI was used to find out which frames are there. And even though I've now given a very detailed prompt, we can combine that into bigger prompts, like saying, hey, all the frames that you find in this program, create them in the repository with a certain naming pattern, and then it would do it automatically. Good. What I've been doing here in Windsurf is something which actually makes more sense to do it in Devon. The Windsurf IDE is capable of doing that, but an IDE, a development environment on your local PC, is actually more suited or more meant to be for for more interaction with the developer. I mean, an IDE is a tool for a developer, let's say it that way. And that's where Devon becomes very interesting. Devon is, now that Cognition has bought Windsurf, the stepbrother of Windsurf, it's a cloud-based AI development environment. Can run these tasks in the cloud. Provides a code wiki, and that's what I'm going to show you very soon. It is also containing a virtual machine that could run, which actually is the foundation where the code change, the code is produced. It has a VS Code-based environment in the browser. Think didn't find any real reference to it, but devin.ai is a website. It sounds a lot like Develop in AI. Quite a cool name for such a tool. So let's quickly look at Devon. Of course, I have to log in. Only it remembers the login. One of the things that Devon provides, and that's very cool when working with code bases that you don't know that well, is a deep wiki. The deep wiki is based on loading a Git repository into Devon, or giving Devon access to a Git repository, and then it interprets the code base. Here, it took around about half an hour for an ABL GUI application that also includes the SmartComponent Library. I don't know how many files, a couple of 10,000 files. And the application is mostly written in German, comments are in German. But I can start asking questions here. And one of the questions I can is where's VAT calculated in this application? The term VAT is never used in the application because it's in German. We will see Mehrwertsteuer, MWST. But since AI large language models put meaning and similarity to words, understanding that VAT and Mehrwertsteuer or VAT and MWST are the same things is very, very simple. So now it gives me an answer to the question where the VAT is calculated, and from what I know about this application, this answer is correct. So now if I would be finding out here that I have duplication, Mehrwertsteuer VAT is calculated in multiple places, then this would be a very helpful first step to analyzing duplications and so on. But Devon is actually great at something else. I'll start with the last one here that are actual Jira tickets that we've used to let Devon refactor code in the framework. And the way it works is we write the Jira ticket, very similar to in one of the demos with Windsurf. And Devon is monitoring our Jira. As soon as we add the Devon label to a ticket, Devon will look into the ticket. And when Devon looks into the ticket, it will immediately give me feedback that it's working on it, and then it will come back with this analysis. And it will say, okay, this is a task, this is what I understood about the task. That are references to existing code and what to do with that and a proposed solution. It also tells me its confidence level. I must say I've learned that I don't give too much about the confidence level, because also a task with confidence low, Devon produces very surprising results. So after this analysis, which comes back a couple of minutes after I assign the task to Devon, you can start the Devon session and then it does the refactoring, and then you can see in the browser basically the same messages rushing through that we'd be seeing in Windsurf. And then it creates a pull request, a GitHub pull request in this case. And then two things happen. I can start reviewing the changes. And at the same time, our Jenkins build server starts working on this branch and will report issues in this branch based on 20,000 unit tests plus the compilation to me. And as soon as I review the code and I make comments in the code, you see Devon gives me the ICE here. That means, okay, it has seen it. Then Devon will fix the code based on my pull review comments. And if I think it's too complex to explain Devon what to do, well, I can just pull the branch locally in my development environment and take over control myself. But in the last couple of weeks, I don't know since when we're using Devon, 5-6 weeks, a majority of the code that I've written is written by Devon. One of the cool things that Devon does when I correct it in the pull requests, it will automatically suggest adding my critic or suggestions as knowledge. And Devon will never make the same mistake again. That's pretty cool. There's another tool that I could really say more played with, Claude Code. Claude Code is again a tool that runs locally, but outside of the IDE. There are a couple of these command line based AI tools. Google Gemini, Atlassian now as an AI agent, Rovo. They're also based on prompting. You write in the console your instructions, and it will then run on those tasks. Using this as a command line based utility, well, gives you even more freedom of IDE. Can even do that then with VI or Emacs or so. And they all also support MCP servers. So all the work that we did on defining the rules in plain text and implementing MCP servers, that is something that we can use with everything. So coming to my end, so the core lessons that we've learned is that most of the time, GenAI will produce valid ABL code. That's one case here where the serializable keyword in the class statement was in the wrong location that I need to look into why it took the wrong turn there. But that actually happened never before. But generally, it works quite well with OpenEdge, and it's definitely helpful. It takes its time sometimes, but then I either have a coffee or go in a conf call or write on the next GR ticket or do some emails, and in the background, the AI is working for me. It's important to use the right tool for the job, and like the choice between what do I do in Windsurf, what do I do in Devon. It's one thing to choose the right tool for the job. What do we do by the LLM, the agent? What do we do in MCP servers? Or when is the right tool for the job a human to write code? Small tasks, they appear to be slow, and especially if you're presenting, while that these 30 seconds of thinking time, they feel like forever. Sometimes AI is turning in cycles. So on a linear timescale, it doesn't appear to be faster than if a human was, but it scales better. And the faster the tasks get, the faster the AI is in the passing lane. The AI doesn't need smoking breaks. The AI doesn't take toilet breaks. The AI keeps on going, and you can scale it better. In Devon, with the smallest license that we're using, I can run 10 of these coding tasks in parallel. And if either of these tasks is as fast as one human developer, well, then I'm 10 times faster with certain tasks. With those tasks where this makes sense. I believe, and I'm not only saying that because I'm a framework vendor, this is my true belief, that with GenAI, the importance of frameworks is increasing. Because you need to define architecture, you need to provide guardrails, you need to know how your application should look like. All these things which are defined in a framework. Otherwise, the AI will just create different code every day. That's not what everybody wants. Frameworks provide code samples, ideally also documentation. Frameworks dramatically reduce the amount of code that's generated because there's a lot of functionality in APIs and base classes. And frameworks provide tooling that can be integrated. So without a framework, GenAI is a great way to write lots of unmaintainable code, just faster. Yeah, the AI tooling changes fast. I believe, or I do not believe, that for as long as I've been a big fan of Pro's Developer Studio, that was almost 20 years, I'll be sticking around with Windsurf or Devon or whatever. These tools are changing so quickly. And I personally, mentally, I'm prepared that if tomorrow somebody tells me that, whatever, I don't know, Google, maybe even Facebook, whatever, has the greatest AI coding tool that then I would give it a try because I don't want to be left behind in productivity. And as such, I will also be looking at these CLI-based tools. Yeah, whatever. LLM and AI or agent issues, they're not always easy to debug. I mean, they give a lot of output. They try to give you explanation why it did certain decisions. But finding out why it added the serializable keyword in front of the class statement, I don't know. It might be that some network request just was slower and therefore it just said, okay, I don't give a shit about looking at existing code and let's just be moving on. One thing that we've done, we've moved our version control system to GitHub. If you look at the descriptions of various of these AI-based tools, they all have a preference for GitHub and not just any Git. So Bitbucket is really something that doesn't work with Devon. GitLab doesn't work with Devon, and the others as well. Checking in, checking out code branching, it's standard in all Git tools, but these tools, they use additional APIs to interact with the pull requests, to interact with the chat, etc. And as a matter of fact, most of these tool vendors go with the winner, and that's GitHub. We moved away from Perforce That's a version control system that I've been using for over 20 years, and I'm very happy with. Perforce is super reliable. Perforce is the king of branching and merging of code. But I always say with the ABL, I'm using an exotic programming language. I don't need to make my life even harder by using an exotic version control system. So we've moved with our main development to GitHub. That's just something I had to accept. QA tooling's super important. The 20,000 unit tests that we have gives me a lot of confidence that whatever change we make on existing code, the chances are low that stuff breaks. Code quality checks, we use the cable plugin, the Sonasus rules within the VS Code environment or Windsurf environment. And if there are linting issues, Windsurf will know about them. It reads those errors too and will try to fix them themselves. SIG secret, another option there. Next impact to our internal infrastructure is we're upgrading our Jenkins installation. Our Jenkins hasn't been updated in years because we want to be able to integrate Jenkins closer with GitHub so that within a GitHub pull request from Devon, we would then be seeing the details, whether the build job and the unit tests have failed or succeeded, that we have the visibility about all those quality aspects in one point. I believe the role of a programmer is changing or will be changing in the next couple of months, few years. What a little bit aggressively I call is try and error coding. So I try to get statements right. I try to get a defined data source and an attached data source statement right, and what's the correct order of arguments to the lookup and the index function in the ABL. That is becoming less and less important because that is where the ABL, where the AI will be better. So programmers should really be looking at describing what is the solution, what is the algorithm that we want to do, how do we group functionality, what functionality is implemented in which place, how big do we do our objects, stuff like that. And developers will need to test and code review and refine the requirements. I think that's a lot where we as humans will provide value, and by not having to do this try and error coding, we actually get more time for that. And I think in combination, that will lead to much higher quality in the code that's written. But I also know that it requires some experience to decide where AI is used well. Especially if you ask pretty wild questions and ask them into ChatGPT or tools that do not have access to your actual code base, the code that comes back may be wrong. And especially for young programmers, that may be quite frustrating and time consuming to understand what's wrong with the code that has been provided. And you need to learn that you should never trust AI. Just because AI spits out some lines of code doesn't mean that it's A, working, or B, the best way of doing stuff. So that's really something that should not be overlooked. And developers need to become equally well in expressing in natural language what they want to code than in the actual programming language. Because when you can express it in natural language well enough, then the AI can do the coding for you. Costs is interesting. We're currently paying at consulting work a couple of $100 or dollars each month into the various AI tools. Windsurf licenses, the Devon subscription. We have a couple of colleagues' subscriptions to OpenAI, so ChatGPT, Claude. We have Claude subscriptions because we use that for the chatbots that we're building. Then there's all these other tools that now all come with a premium for AI. Our Git client, Jira, wants to get extra money for using the AI features, Copilot, Notion. And all these tools, they start with 20, 30, 40 euros per user per month. But when you then have 15 users and 10 of these tools, that accumulates quickly to some money. And when you intensively use Devon and Windsurf to generate code, then you will see that there are going to be monthly costed, and yeah, we need to be thinking about, well, how do we let our customers participate in these costs if we're getting more efficient in the work that we do for our customers through these tools. So that's something where we just need to think about a billing model there. Good. With that, I'm done with the actual content. I would like to introduce you at the end a newsletter. A couple of weeks ago, we released the first edition of our newsletter. We're planning to have new editions or additional editions of this newsletter every 2 or 3 months. On this website or by emailing marketing@consultingwork.com, you can subscribe to this newsletter. The theme of the next couple of webinars that we're doing will be AI based. So in 3 weeks from now, I'll be doing another webinar on actually implementing MCP servers with OpenEdge. Then I'm not yet quite sure when and in which order. We plan a webinar on integrating chatbots into OpenEdge applications and implementing chatbots that can access data from OpenEdge applications. And going to give a deeper dive into some Windsurf features. If we're still using Windsurf towards the end of the year, we'll see. Maybe it's going to be a different tool, but that is the current plan. Yeah, and then the next events for us will be in a week and a half from now in Boston, the American Pack Challenge, and in 6 weeks from now in Valencia in Spain, the European Pack Challenge. A couple of my colleagues and myself are doing presentations there, and more of our team are there. So looking forward to seeing you there. And with that, Peter, have there been any questions?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, there's one from Aubrey. Asks, for QA tooling, have you ever encountered XLQ or Browser Stack?
XLQ and Browser Stack. The short answer is no. My personal focus is also on writing the ABL backend. So the QA tooling that we do is maybe our own unit testing tool, Smart Unit or ABL Unit, which is very similar. I've worked with some customers that also done UI testing, but not with any of those tools that you referenced there. And it's really having a huge suite of unit tests using a tool like Cable, Sonar Source to check for coding standard violations. That should be the beginning thing. I think this Browser Stack, that sounds like a web browser testing tool. That is then certainly a next step then for browser-based applications. Our Angular team is using some browser-based testing, but I don't know the name right now which we're using there.
That was it so far on the questions.
Okay, good. Well, if there are other questions, just reach out by email. We've recorded this webinar. We'll do some editing and probably post it on YouTube either tomorrow or no later than Monday, Tuesday next week. You can also comment then on that video. Good. Well, then thank you for your time. Hope you found it interesting, and see you soon.